when you have most of the people in Africa don't have access to food, don't have access to hospitals, just basic health care, don't have access to school, stuff like that, you're talking of war. So war is not just when, you know, the armies are dropping bombs, stuff like that. When you die from hunger and you're sick and you know you will die because you don't have money to pay the doctors. And families, they know their loved ones gonna die because they know they can't afford to take the loved one to hospital. And that's what something you see throughout Africa. Wherever you go, from South Africa to North Africa, you see people suffering, catching hell in every serious way. That's what imperialism has imposed on us as a result, as a condition of having access to our resources.
The Black is Back Coalition is a criticism of the traditional peace movement, our existence, the traditional anti-war movement. We say that it's not enough just to recognize those struggles, those questions that disturb the consciousness, that disturb the comfort level of white people in Europe or North America as war. That war abounds, that every time we look up and we see Amadou Diallo or Sean Bell, every time we look up and see police murder in the streets of this country against our people, we are looking at war. That when we look at the poverty of the masses of African people whose labor built this country, we are looking at war. This is war. Where is the peace movement that cannot recognize the war that's being made against Africans, Mexicans, so-called Indians, and vast majority of other peoples around the world? There's something wrong with that kind of peace movement, that kind of peace.
At root, the genocide in Congo is the result of a U.S. proxy war. And that proxy war is itself part of a long-term U.S. strategy to create chaos in those parts of Africa that the Americans cannot directly control.
The only thing now you can see, you can give us a rationale to the world who is watching to say is the people, the Tutsi versus this, or this tribe that against this tribe this. But there's nothing like that. What you see is imperialist war.
If the United States is not at war with black people, where did all the prisoners come from? Why are they capturing so many people if we are not at war?
All our problems have to be solved as one people. And a part of our efforts to build this anti-war movement is to win Africa to the African consciousness. By that we mean that we cannot have an anti-war movement just for Haiti, for example. Or we cannot have an anti-war movement just for Congo. Or we can have a national application of that, but it has to first to be a unified anti-war movement to end all wars against Africa and the black people everywhere. That's the starting point. That's where we are. In August, that on the 20th, that will be Saturday, that we do an international day of action against imperialist war on Africa and African people worldwide. And that will give opportunity to all Africans around the world to come together, because one condition for our victory is to unify the consciousness of the Africans. In the mind of African people, we have to see ourselves as 1 billion people strong, moving in the same direction, which is the liberation and the unification of our homeland, which is Africa.
Marshawn Pitts says the officer started by verbally abusing him because his shirt wasn't tucked in.
I was tucking my shirt in.
But it's what happens next after the officer puts down his coffee that had Marshawn Pitts worried for his life.
It was just like, boom.
He says he was blindsided by the officer, thrown into lockers and struck repeatedly.
Where did he hit you?
He hit me like right here, and boom.
Watch as he gets slammed to the ground, his face smashed into the floor.
It still has a bump.
Right here.
The new analysis of the U.S. prison population finds more black men are incarcerated now than were enslaved in 1850. The figures are stunning. They are sobering, eye-opening numbers. The latest estimates by the Bureau of Justice putting the number of imprisoned African-American men at more than 846,000. While black men account for roughly 6.5% of the U.S. population, they make up 40.2% of the prison population.
And I want to talk about U.S. wars at home, and particularly its internal colonies. A shock and awe of racist disaster capital that has left a trail of homelessness, unemployment, police repression, that was always there, mass incarceration, and a degradation of life economically, politically, and culturally for blacks. In addition, and worst of all, psychological captivity to a black president who could care less. But let me give you a quick capsulation of the gentrification in Harlem and the manner in which it is being done with the partners of Barack Obama. Columbia University is expanding its campus in the western corridor of Harlem, West Harlem. It's an 18-acre land grab. Gentrification, let me just say this just pretty clearly, it's nearly complete in Harlem. Now, the prison system supports the upstate economy of New York State. I think we all know that. And we all know that Harlem is one of 7 neighborhoods that feeds people, black men, Latino men and women, into the prison industrial complex. We have to shore up our collaboration with our brothers and sisters in Mexico, with our brothers and sisters from Cuba and Latin America, and our brothers and sisters from all over the world suffering under the yoke of imperialism and disaster racist capitalism. We can do it, and there is no better place that I feel proud to be than here and in the same arena with Black is Back. Thank you very much.
Black power. Black power. Yeah, you know them bad Negroes. There was a member of the Atlanta Project of SNCC that got fired with guns by Kwame Ture and Jamil Alamid when they weren't quite ready for the revolution. You know what I mean? So I say black power real strong and earnestly. It's important also that we recognize the fact that prisoners have been resisting in this country from its inception. If you start with the enslavement of Africans and you recognize the prison system as a mechanism for the limitation of liberty, then we don't get confused about the reversal that we have at this point in time in terms of the numbers, although we remain repulsed, appalled, and outraged by it. Studies and reports submitted to the United Nations, and especially I give credit to Brother Ajamu Baraka, the Executive Director of the U.S. Human Rights Network, for pulling together more than 25 reports which were submitted to the United Nations, resulting in the unprecedented and historic issuance of 228 criticisms from around the world, friend and foe alike, of the United States. And those criticisms ranging from not just the high incarceration rates, the process of incarceration, the conditions of incarceration, as well as a panoply of lack of access to health care, homelessness, lack of access to meaningful education and technology. You'll appreciate that, good. To add to that, the use of the criminal punishment system against juveniles, ranging from the school to the jailhouse train, which ensures that they become fodder generation after generation, and the life without possibility of parole, which is imposed on youth, primarily youth of color, as young as 14 years old. The disproportionate number of Black and Latino men and increasing numbers of women in the criminal punishment system puts the United States out of compliance and in clear violation of international conventions on the elimination of racial discrimination. CERD is what it's called. And the International Convention on Cultural and Political Rights, given the indicia for racial profiling, used in racial profiling. The urgent nature of this problem is found in both national and state data. The United States has the largest incarceration rate in the world, as we all know. As of December 21st, 2008, there were 754 inmates per 100,000 U.S. residents. According to the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics, in 2008, over 7.3 million people, or 1 in every 31 in the United States, were on probation, in jail or prison, or on parole. 1 of 31, that's the general population. While 1 in 30 men between the ages of 20 and 34 is behind bars, for Black males in that age group, the figure is 1 in 9. The devastating impact of incarceration on families and communities is profound, affecting future income, opportunities for employment, civic engagement, and well-being into the future. According to the Sentencing Project, the incarceration rates of women of color, in particular mothers, is staggering. The number of incarcerated mothers has more than doubled, 122%, from 29,500 in 1991 to 65,600 in 2007, with evident racial disparities impacting their children. 1 in 15 Black children and 1 in 42 Latino children has a parent in prison, compared to 1 in 111 white children. Estimates indicate that Black women represent 30% of all females incarcerated under state or federal jurisdiction. Hispanic women represent 16%. Black women are 3 times as likely as white women to be incarcerated, and Hispanic women are 69% more likely than white women. In its last report to the committee, meaning the Human Rights Council, the working group of the Universal Periodic Review, the United States noted that reasons for such racial disparities in the criminal justice system are complex and do not necessarily indicate differential treatment of persons in the criminal justice system. Now, Alice in Wonderland, I ask you.
People are still trying to figure out how to organize themselves. There's going to be fear, anxiety, a sense of desperation in some cases. I've been in contact with President Preval. I've been talking to the folks on the ground. We are going to be making slow and steady progress. And the key now is for everybody in Haiti to understand that there is going to be sustained help on the way. But what these gentlemen are going to be able to do is, when the news media starts seeing its attention drift to other things, but there's still enormous needs on the ground. These 2 gentlemen of extraordinary stature, I think, are going to be able to help ensure that these efforts are sustained. And that's why it's so important, and that's why I'm so grateful that they agreed to do it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Will any of you travel to Haiti soon? What about Secretary Clinton there this morning, Mr. President?
Patrols that put few at ease. With nearly 20,000 troops and a yearly price tag of $1.4 billion, the UN mission in Congo, known as MONUC, is the largest and most expensive UN mission in the world.
French and UN helicopters have been attacking Laurent Gbagbo's forces and strongholds in the city, a major escalation of the international community's efforts to oust the entrenched leader.
The United States and imperialism in general are in a state of permanent war. And when you see how this capitalism began, it began by stealing Africans. That's war. Because remember, for every African that left Africa, he left his wife in Africa, or the wife left her husband in Africa, or someone left his children in Africa, his nieces, his grandparents, uncles, all that. That was war, because you cannot separate a husband from his loving wife without war. You cannot do that. So you have war from the beginning. That's what war. And slavery itself is a form of war. Colonialism is a form of war. It's an economy of war. So from the very beginning up to present day, you're dealing with an economy of war all the time. It's not just the manufacturing of weapons and stuff like that, but the entire edifice, the entire economy requires wars all the time. That's what the system we're dealing with is all about. Now, if you look at Africa today, what you will see, every day, at least 400 million Africans go hungry. Every day, at least. In the places like the Congo, you have at least 3/4 of the population don't have access to drinking water. But this is a place full of water, rivers, everything like that. You talk about malaria, for example, you have at least 1 million people dying from malaria every day. At least 1 million. And more than a half of those who are dying from malaria are children. That's war. That's war. When you have most of the people in Africa don't have access to food, don't have access to hospitals, just basic health care, don't have access to school, stuff like that, you're talking of war. So war is not just when, you know, the armies are dropping bombs, stuff like that. When you're dying from hunger and you're sick and you know you will die because you don't have money to pay the doctors. And families, they know their loved ones are going to die because they know they can't afford to take their loved one to hospital. And that's what something you see throughout Africa. Wherever you go, from South Africa to North Africa, you see people suffering, catching hell in every serious way. That's what imperialism has imposed on us as a result, as a condition of having access to our resources. They don't just go and say, we're going to trade with you. There's no trade. They go and loot and kill and impose all these conditions of existence to the people. And that's what you see every day. And we talk about the situation of wars as people understand it. You have heard about war in Sudan. You heard about war in the Congo. You heard about war in Angola. You heard about war in Algeria, war in Mozambique. And you can name all these places. Imperialism has involved for sometimes now in Africa in wars to reverse the gains made through the struggles for independence. You all know the greatest struggles of the 60s. And the response of the United States was what? Is to impose wars in all those places where they saw the emergence of a powerful national liberation movement. When they were not able to control those national movements, they imposed war on the people. And one example is the Congo itself. You all remember the great Patrice Lumumba? Yeah. What was the results? What was the response to the United States? It was murder of Patrice Lumumba, murder of all the leaders around Patrice Lumumba, but also the imposition of war on the Congo. And we have a situation where at least 1 million people were killed just in the process to impose what they call peace, where we are not able to fight back anymore. 1 million people. And they film it. There are footages now on the internet where you can see what they say mob out. They will go on houses after houses, and the children, you know, they'll be hidden in the house, they'll throw grenades, and anyone who try to run away, then shoot them, you know. They did that for, you know, for days in the Congo, you know, in the heartlands of Patrice Lumumba, because they said anyone who's from the age of 70 years old is Lumumba's, so you should go deal with them. So they killed and they killed and killed. You know, that's how it was. When the peace movements here talks about war, they're not talking about the war that's taking place in Africa, generally speaking. I never seen a sustained anti-war movement in Europe, in England where I am, to stop the war taking place against Africa. I never seen that. I never heard of any massive mobilization against war, against wars taking place in the Congo. I never seen that. I never seen anything like that. But you have a situation where at least 5 million people are dead. And every day in the Congo, at least 2,000 people die as a result of the imposition of war. Because you got to see, the war that has been imposed in the Congo has been imposed on the condition of genocide. I'm not just talking about the war where you get the guns and all that. But the people who are suffering from war have no access to health care whatsoever. So when they run away from the war, where do they go? They go in the bushes, but when you go in the bushes, you don't have access to basic food, like basic clean water, stuff like that. And the people die as a result of running away from war. People die as a result of being put in the concentration camps. Because in any given time, when you go to places like Congo and Sudan, you have millions and millions of Africans in what they call refugee camps or internally displaced camps, which are nothing but concentration camps. You remember the cholera that's killing Africans in Haiti? Yeah. That's how it works, because you cannot live in a concentration camps. There are no sanitation, there are nothing, no clean water, no health care, nothing. So people are concentrated, just part like animals, because that's a way also of killing people. We are saying that there is war, because you just run away from war. Now you're safe, you are in the refugee camps. But refugee camps themselves are death camps. Death camps. And you will see many people dying just as a result of being in those death camps. And the war in Africa is not just war where they drop bombs, as I'm saying. It's also war to break the spirit, to break the resistance, the will to resist. You should see how they do it in the Congo. You have rape, collective rape, where they gather the community. You go and watch, surrounded by soldiers. And they not only soldiers, they rape the women in front of everybody, and the husband and the children have to watch. You don't watch, they kill you in front of everybody. Then they will get the young to rape the older women. And you know something about African culture? A younger person cannot see a naked body of an adult because they believe you will be cursed. Now you get a young people to do that in the front of everybody. So you're destroying psychologically not just that person and that woman, also the entire community. This is not a one-off. This planned, organized. That's what they teach them in the School of Americas, those kind of places. That's strategy for warfare, how you destroy the community's spirit to resist. So no one wants to talk to anybody. Everyone wants to be by themselves or run away. You know, men just leave the families, they go somewhere else because they can't deal with what they just witnessed. And this has been going on for years and years and years. That's what's going on right now as we're talking in Congo. You get our children, you give them guns. They are what, 11, they are 10, they are 12. As a condition to give them those guns, they have to kill. We got friends. We go to the armies. They tell us what they did. They explain that you have to kill 50 when we go to that places. You kill 100, and they have to justify those killings. So you remember King Leopold II, when they built their army, that for every bullet you use, you must justify the use of that bullet. So the soldiers will bring back hands, penises, stuff like that to justify. That's what they did. It has no change, the same thing. Those young men have to justify what they're doing. So you have the break up of social fabrics as we're talking right now, because this will make it difficult for people to come together and organize and fight back. That's what basically it's happening now. And that war you see, and then when you watch the TV and we are told what? We are told is tribal wars, is ethnic wars. There are no ethnic wars like that in Africa. All the wars in Africa are imperialist wars, all of them imperialist wars, because they are wars to bring the loots, to bring the gold, to bring the content. Like everybody was using a mobile phone, everybody was using a cell phone, everybody was using Nintendos, you name it. All these things have loots, raw material coming from Africa, in particular coming from the Congo where the war has been taking place.
When it's ready for harvesting, you see imported potato right out in front of your home being sold. Potato that's grown in Idaho or New Brunswick or some other parts.
Hello? The shipment come every week, you know. Them can Irish, the US, the America, the one in Canada. And the red peas, they sell like America.
When I was a little boy, I grew. Everybody that you see around here, their livelihood was planting peanuts. All those days are over. Over and gone.
All this land is what we used to farm carrots. Now we cannot farm anymore. We don't got any market for it. Because through the foreign carrots.
It's an insult to our dignity of not being able to produce and sell in your own market at home.
The disturbances involving migrants, residents and police began Thursday night after 2 Africans were wounded with pellet gunfire in an attack. At least 37 people have been injured so far.
We must go away because the locals do not want us here. They hit one of us and he was taken to hospital. What can we do?
Windows were smashed and cars were damaged. Shops and schools remained closed as tensions remained high. Anger flared among locals.
They want jobs, but there are no jobs even for us. I've been out of work for a year and a half.
In 40 years, more than 100,000 Colombians have been killed in a multi-sided conflict over land and natural resources. 3 million people have lost their homes in just the last 20 years. In the countryside, some villagers literally pick up their homes and move them to safer areas. Others flee to the cities to find what shelter they can. Their farm skills are worthless in the urban landscape. Children and young adults growing up in this environment are seduced into a culture of violence. The only work for them might be in gangs or illegal militias.
We live in a world in which Eurocentric thinking is hegemonic. It permeates every nook and cranny of the American conversation. white supremacist assumptions are built into every news story that we see and read and hear. And that includes the most basic fundamentals of the story, which is why is it important and who is it important to? Even dedicated revolutionaries need periodically to come to conferences like this to fumigate their minds and purge themselves of the layers and layers of Eurothought and corporate thinking that accumulate from our daily exposure to their media. Otherwise, we wind up thinking that what is important to CNN is also what's important to the human race, and that is not the case. Therefore, when we present a critique of the white left, we are also helping each other in the Black is Back coalition to avoid unconsciously buying into the white corporate media's narrative of what is important to the world. Our obligation to ourselves and to our potential allies is to constantly re-examine the world as it exists, or else we are of no use to anybody, including ourselves. Our diligent and critical analysis, in addition to the practical work that all of us do, is what gives us the moral right to challenge the white left as we are today. Which brings us to another important reason that we're having this conference on the other wars. These other wars that the white left gives such a low priority and the white corporate media virtually ignore may be, as Comrade O'Malley says, the very struggles that have critical significance for the continued survival of imperialism. If we are not looking at these wars, we are not looking at imperialism's Achilles heel. And we do not want imperialism to hang around any second longer than it needs to. So everybody that is serious about defeating imperialism has to go beyond the very short white left list of wars. This is a narrow list that is comprised of wars that either put American soldiers at risk or that involve oil or Israel or both, or fit into the war on Islamic terror scenario that is an invention of the imperialists themselves. And it is the context of a 500-year war, a war that is ongoing. We are still in the midst of this 500-year war that began, let's call the date 1492, when Western Europeans broke out of their subcontinent to begin what would become a war against the rest of planet Earth. In the process, they would acquire enough riches by stealing the resources and the labor and the very bodies of the peoples they conquered in these centuries of uninterrupted warfare. They would be enabled to make a transition to a mature capitalist system. As they subdued and erased and enslaved various non-European peoples in the world, they proceeded to establish a global racial hierarchy that is still with us. Their predations on the rest of humanity would take on the characteristics in time, and in a very short space of time, the characteristics of a race war. The world that we inhabit today was shaped by this 500 years war, that was at least partially a race war. It was the Europeans' own justifications for that half a millennium of global warfare that gave it the characteristics of a race war. In other words, the Europeans saw it and said they saw it, that is, their contact with, their wars against other people, as a race war. It's not us saying it, they said it contemporaneously with those wars. These centuries of European warfare and forcible subjugation of the colored peoples of the planet shaped the world as we know it today. Very early on in their rampage, Europeans declared that their military and economic supremacy on the planet was part of the natural order of things. These were not conflicts between civilizations, these European wars against other peoples. These were the advance of civilization. Every contact they had with other peoples, every time they crushed another civilization, it was depicted as an advance of civilization, the advance of Western civilization, which then became, of course, white civilization, and now they credit it with being all of humanity's civilization. They conquer, subjugate, enslave, and make relentless war against the rest of the world, and they call that progress and civilization. The great white American imperialist Teddy Roosevelt, who was certainly speaking for the bulk of the white Americans of his era, saw the extinction of the Red Indian, that's what he called them, as a natural consequence of the Indians' contact with the white man. Africans were said to be doomed to eternal barbarity if it were not for the white man. It would follow then, of course, the logic would say, that the forcible suppression of these people was an inevitable and benign process. And if this is how you're framing it, then you're not engaged in war at all. These are not wars. Certainly these are not wars in the sense that, let's say, the Napoleonic Wars were wars. These Napoleonic Wars and other European wars were wars between equals. But the contact with the non-white world was not a war between equals. It was civilization versus barbarians and lesser peoples. I don't think that if you ask the average college-educated person who has a passing knowledge of history to name an African, a war fought by Europeans against Africans, I don't believe that they could name one battle. They could name all kinds of European wars. They could name wars fought in Asia, but they couldn't name one battle fought against Africans, because this conflict, this contact, these conquests were not thought of as wars. Most white people, certainly most white people in the United States, believe that they deserve the spoils that have been handed down to them through these conquests, and they are not unhappy with the results of the European breakout 5 centuries ago. They do not think that it is a history of unrelenting aggression, or that their white privilege is the result of 500 years of merciless, aggressive warfare. And even on the left, most whites cling to their privilege of deciding what constitutes war and which wars should be ended and under what condition.
The disruption of the peace, the primary disturber of the peace in the world is imperialism, a social system. The Black is Back Coalition is a criticism of the traditional peace movement, our existence, the traditional anti-war movement. We say that it's not enough just to recognize those struggles, those questions that disturb the consciousness, that disturb the comfort level of white people in Europe or North America as war. That war abounds, that every time we look up and we see Amadou Diallo or Sean Bell, every time we look up and see police murder in the streets of this country against our people, we are looking at war. that when we look at the poverty of the masses of African people whose labor built this country, we are looking at war. This is war. Where is the peace movement that cannot recognize the war that's being made against Africans, Mexicans, so-called Indians, and vast majority of other peoples around the world? There's something wrong with that kind of peace movement, that kind of peace. So the Black is Back Coalition is a criticism of that notion. We're not interested in peace just when it comes to dealing with issues that make North Americans, Europeans, white people uncomfortable. We live in a state of permanent discomfort. Every time a child of ours leaves the house and is gone for more than late for 15 minutes, we have to wonder whether that child has been captured by U.S. military forces that call themselves police or killed in the streets of this country. That is a reality that we have to live with. And so we want to see a real peace movement happen in this country. We want to see a real anti-war movement happen in this country. We want to see a peace movement, an anti-war movement that is so willing for individuals so willing to lay their bodies down, to destroy a missile that's going to be used in some other country, an anti-war movement, peace activists who are so willing to lay their bodies down in front of tanks that's going to be deployed in Afghanistan or Iraq, to be able to do the same thing with police precincts that where the police cars are moving into the African communities in this country. We reject a notion of peace that excludes the war that's been made against our people and that's been made against the vast majority of the other peoples around the world. Karl Marx said he was not a nationalist. He was not an African. He said that when it comes, said that this thing that he calls primitive accumulation played in political economy a role that is equal to original sin, the equivalent of original sin in theology. In other words, the whole thing that we are talking about, the whole imperialism that we are talking about, rests upon the oppression of black people, of people who have suffered colonialism and do suffer a form of colonialism all around the world today. That some people talk about imperialism as something that is a consequence of capitalism having developed to a certain level. In fact, V.I. Lenin used to refer to imperialism as capitalism that has become rotten ripe. We say that the imperialism that we look at is something that gave birth to capitalism itself. We revert back to Marx's perception that it was primitive accumulation that gave rise to capitalism, and that this primitive accumulation was the enslavement of African people. It was the attack on China by the British, the so-called Opium War. It was the attack on the Vietnamese by the French that brought all kinds of resources for more than 100 years into France from stolen resources in the form of drugs for them primarily. It was the war that was made against indigenous peoples throughout the Americas. It is the existence of America itself, of what we call America. That is primitive accumulation of capital that gave rise to the capitalism that people say that they are opposed to. We say that, yes, imperialism is capitalism, but capitalism is a consequence of what we recognize as imperialism, which is the war against the rest of us. So, the other thing that we would mention is that most of the so-called anti-war activity is activity that is directed at a particular policy of imperialism. For example, the war against the people of Afghanistan, the war against the people of Iraq, the war against that group or that group represents a particular policy of imperialism. Imperialism is not a policy, it is a system. It is not good enough just to be against this policy or that policy. You'll be running around in circles forever. Because war, the policy one time was to attack Vietnam. against the war in Vietnam. And this, before you even rested from that, imperialism is attacking people in Nicaragua, against the war in Nicaragua, and over and over and over again. But imperialism breeds war. And war is a consequence of the existence of imperialism. Imperialism started as war. The existence of America started as war. War on the indigenous peoples here. War on what we call the Mexican people. War on black people. That's how it all got started. So it's not good enough to be against a particular policy that makes you uncomfortable. Sometime, someplace, we got to stop and say, hey, we must oppose imperialism itself. As a social system, it has no redeeming qualities. When we are able to do that, then we are not confused by things like the representative of imperialism, whether that representative is a white man from Texas or a Negro from we don't know where. It doesn't matter who it represents. It is a social system. It will allow a Negro, an Eskimo, a Mexican, anybody to represent it as long as it preserves the social system of imperialism. What we are looking at, of course, with Barack Hussein Obama is white power in blackface. It had to disguise itself because the oppressed peoples around the world had risen up and said that we will not suffer white oppression any longer. I want you to support the Black is Back Coalition because this is the best thing that's happened to us since the 1960s. It has brought together all kinds of forces from all kinds of backgrounds and coming from all different persuasions. But it is a coalition that recognizes that it is impossible for it is possible for African people to unite around the principle of self-determination. That we have a right to be a self-determining people, that we have a responsibility to be a self-determining people. That is, it would be a complete failure to African people around the world, to African people suffering in Haiti from U.S. and United Nations, which is to say U.S. Oppression and domination, right? It would be sacrificing our responsibility to our brothers and sisters throughout South America, the Caribbean, etc. It would be sacrificing our responsibility to our allies, our comrades, and other people suffering from imperialism, the Mexican people, to the indigenous population, the other parts of the indigenous population. Nobody even talks about the Indians if they're not in the room. You understand? And this is the land upon whom we stand. The indigenous peoples, the Mexicans, the Indians, it's their land. It's their land. I got a homeland. And I'm fighting for it every inch of the way, every day that we can. So I want to thank you for coming out. I want to call on you to support this coalition. Let's build a real, genuine anti-imperialist movement because African people are going to take back what belongs to us. We want our happiness. And we want every damn thing that's been stolen from us over the last 400 or 500 years. We're coming to get it all. We're just like the people in Palestine. We're just like the people in Pakistan. We're just like all those other people who are oppressed and who are now rising up to take back their resources. So we are hoping that we can build a genuine anti-imperialist movement. We are not going to have a movement any longer where people can call peace. And that's not going to be permissible. It's not going to be permissible to have another so-called anti-war demonstration, have another so-called peace march that does not deal with the oppression of African people here and around the world, that does not deal with the oppression of the indigenous people and the Mexican people here.
really think the war on terror is a bunch of bullshit? Just a poor excuse for you to use up all your bullets. How much money does it take to really make a full clip? 9/11 Building 7, did they really pull it? And a bunch of other cover-ups. Your child's future was the first to go with budget cuts. If you think that hurts, then wait, here comes the uppercut. The school was garbage in the first place, that's on the up and up. Keep you at the bottom, but tease you with the upper crust. You get it, then they move it, so you never keeping up enough. If you turn on TV, all you see is a bunch of what the fucks. Dude is dating so-and-so, blabbering about such and such, and that ain't Jersey Shore. Homie, that's the news, and these the same people supposedly telling us the truth. Limbaugh is a racist, Glenn Beck is a racist. Gaza Strip was getting bombed, Obama didn't say shit. That's why I ain't vote for him. Next one either. I'm a part of the problem. My problem is I'm peaceful, and I believe in the people. Yeah. It's never heard it, but if we know better, then we probably deserve it. Jihad is not holy war, where's that in the worship? Murdering is not Islam, and you are not observant. And you are not a Muslim. Israel, don't take my side, cause look how far you've pushed them. Walk with me into the ghetto, this where all the kush went. Complain about the liquor store, but what you drinking liquor for? Complain about the gloom, but when you pick a broom up, just listen in the pot, ain't gon' make it stop. A rebel in your thoughts, ain't gon' make it out. If you don't become an actor, you'll never be a factor. Pills with million side effects, take them when the pain's felt. Wash them down with diet soda, killing off your brain cells. Crooked banks around the world would gladly give a loan today. So if you ever miss a payment, they can take your home away. Worse than all the violence. Fear is such a weak emotion, that's why I despise it. We scared of almost everything, afraid to even tell the truth. So scared of what you think of me, I'm scared of even telling you. Sometimes I'm like the only person I feel safe to tell it to. I'm locked inside a cell in me, I know that there's a gel in you. Consider this your belling out, so take a breath and hell a few. My screams is finally getting free, my thoughts is finally yelling down.